My toxic sister called CPS on me because I wouldn't lend her money, and the way I got revenge is currently a felony on her permanent record. It all started on a Tuesday afternoon when my sister Miley called me sobbing uncontrollably, gasping for air, claiming her car transmission had just blown out on the highway and she was stranded. She told me she needed $5,000 immediately for repairs or she would miss a huge job interview and likely lose her apartment, basically begging me to save her life. I almost sent the money. I really did, but my husband Dominic always tells me to verify before I trust, so I decided to check her burner Instagram account, IslandGirl99, just to see where she was. I refreshed the feed and my stomach dropped because there it was, posted 14 minutes ago, a screenshot of a luxury checkout page for a healing villa in Tulum, Mexico. The total price was exactly $4,980, and the caption read, "Manifesting this trip because I deserve to be pampered." I felt the rage rising in my throat, realized she wasn't on the side of the road. She was sitting in her bedroom at our mom's house, trying to scam me into funding her spring break. I interrupted her fake panic attack and told her I was looking at the Tulum post, told her I wasn't going to finance her vacation while I worked 60 hours a week to pay for my son's daycare. The crying stopped instantly, like flipping a switch, and her voice dropped into this low, venomous tone that actually scared me. She didn't apologize, she just screamed that I was hoarding wealth, that I thought I was better than her just because I was married and stable. And then she delivered the threat that started the war. "Hope you're ready to lose everything, Kenzie." I blocked her number, thought that was the end of it. But 2 days later, Dominic and I were in the kitchen making spaghetti when there was a heavy, authoritative pounding on our front door. I opened it to find 2 police officers and a woman in a stiff blazer holding a clipboard. She introduced herself as Mrs. McGee from Child Protective Services. My knees almost buckled when she told me they had received a Priority 1 report regarding severe neglect, specifically that I was using heroin in the home, that the house was covered in animal feces, and that my 3-year-old son Jeffrey was starving. It was a nightmare. I had to stand there trembling while strangers tore through my spotless kitchen, opening cupboards, checking the trash for needles, looking at my terrified toddler to see if he was bruised. Mrs. McGee made me go into the guest bathroom and submit to a urine analysis right there, forcing me to pee in a cup with the door open while she watched, just to prove I wasn't a drug addict. I felt violated, dirty, completely helpless. But as I walked back into the living room while they tested the sample, I happened to look out the open front door. The sun was setting, casting long shadows down the street, and parked 3 houses down was a beat-up silver sedan that I recognized immediately. It was Miley. She was sitting in the driver's seat with the window down, leaning out to get a better view of the police lights flashing against my house. And when she saw me looking, she didn't hide. She just smiled. I stood paralyzed in the doorway, unable to move or scream as I watched my sister grin from her car, knowing that if I ran out there to confront her, Mrs. McGee would document it as erratic behavior and use it against me. I was forced to close the door and lock it, sliding the deadbolt home with a click that felt like a prison cell closing, before walking back into the living room where Officer Dudley was still looming over my terrified son. Mrs. McGee finally looked at the test strip and muttered that it was negative. Clearly disappointed she didn't find the drug den she was promised, but then she dropped the second bomb. She told me that because the allegations involved hard drugs, they couldn't close the case immediately, meaning they would have to keep an open file for 30 days and conduct unannounced home visits twice a week just to make sure I didn't relapse. I begged her, told her it was a false report made by my sister because of a money dispute, but she just looked at me like I was a case number and forced me to sign a safety plan under threat of emergency foster care. They finally left at 7:30 and I collapsed onto the sofa holding Jeffrey until he fell asleep, too exhausted to even cry, until the garage door opened and Dominic walked in. He's a data analyst who usually runs on pure logic, but as I explained how my sister had weaponized the police against us, I watched a cold and quiet rage take over his face that I had never seen before. And he didn't yell or throw things, he just looked at me and said, "We are burying her." But before we went to war, I needed to know whose side my mother was on, so I unblocked Shirley and called her, only for her to pick up instantly and ask if I was okay, because Miley was so worried when she drove by. I felt like I had been slapped. I told her Miley wasn't worried, told her Miley had called in the fake report to blackmail me, and waited for my mother to be outraged. Instead, Shirley sighed that long, suffering sigh she uses to guilt trip me, telling me that Miley was just stressed about her job hunt, actually having the audacity to say that if I had just loaned her the money in the first place, none of this tension would be happening. I realized in that moment that I didn't have a mother. I had a hostage negotiator for a terrorist, so I told her she was right, told her I had backed Miley into a corner, and then I hung up and blocked her number for good. Dominic called me over to the dining table, where he had pulled the SD card from our security hub, pulling up the footage from 6:45 to show the silver sedan parking down the street. We watched Miley pull out her phone and laugh, having a full conversation while watching my life fall apart. And while I argued that it proved she was awful, but not a criminal, Dominic reminded me that he had installed the long-range audio firmware firmware upgrade last month. He cranked the volume up, and through the static, Miley's voice cut through crystal clear, laughing maniacally while she narrated the raid to her friend, saying, "Yeah, the cops are in there right now. It's hilarious. She's gonna panic and pay me the $5,000 just to make it stop. It's literally free money." Dominic paused the recording and looked at me, telling me that we didn't just have proof she was there, we had a confession and clear intent of extortion, which is a felony in our state. We knew we couldn't just hand it to the police yet because she might claim she was joking, so we decided to set a trap to seal the deal. I picked up my phone and unblocked Miley, typing out a text that begged her for help, telling her I was terrified of losing Jeffrey and asking if the $5,000 would make it stop. Her reply popped up instantly. "I knew you'd come to your senses. Cash only. I'm coming over right now." And as I looked at Dominic adjusting the hidden nanny cam on the bookshelf, I realized my sister thought she was coming for a payday, but she had no idea she was walking into her own funeral. My sister didn't know my Ring camera records audio from the street, and that 30-second clip just became her felony charge. But before we sprung the trap, Dominic and I paid an emergency visit to a shark of a lawyer named Mr. Newman to make sure the cage was ironclad. He listened to the audio of Miley laughing about the raid and told us that while we had malicious prosecution, we needed the quid pro quo to guarantee prison time, meaning we needed her to explicitly agree to take the money in exchange for retracting her statement to CPS. So he drafted a civil lawsuit and a restraining order, put them in a heavy cream-colored envelope, and told me, "Happy hunting." Fast forward to Friday night and the stage was set, with Dominic monitoring the hidden nanny cam from the office upstairs while I sat on the couch trying to look like a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown, waiting for the vampire to come inside. Miley pulled into the driveway at 7:45, checking her makeup in the mirror like she was getting ready for a date, breezing into my living room without knocking, bringing a cloud of vanilla vape juice and cheap perfume with her while she gave me a fake sympathetic hug. She sat opposite me and sipped her iced coffee, telling me she hated seeing me like this and claiming she could make the CPS case go away because she knew people at the intake center who could delete the file. I played my part perfectly, asking her with a trembling voice if she would really help me, and she leaned forward like a shark smelling blood, telling me she needed $5,000 cash immediately to heal her vibration in Tulum, and she would make the call right in front of me. I reached under the coffee table and pulled out the thick envelope Mr. Newman had given me, watching Miley's eyes light up as she snatched it from my hand, ripping the flap open because she was already mentally spending the money on margaritas. Her brow furrowed when she pulled out a stack of legal bond paper instead of cash, asking me what the hell this was, so I stood up and told her to read the bold text at the top, which said, "Superior Court summons, civil action for damages and emergency restraining order." She went pale as she flipped to the next page and saw the transcript of her phone call from the street, screaming that I couldn't record her, but I crossed my arms and told her that in our state there is no expectation of privacy on a public street, and she had just shouted her felony plans into a high-definition microphone. She threw the papers at my face and stepped toward me with her fists clenched, threatening to tell the police I hit her so I would go to jail. But Dominic stepped out from the hallway, holding his iPad, which displayed the live feed of her meltdown. He told her she was on 4K, and the footage was backing up to the cloud in real time, barking at her to get off his property, or he would call the police for an arrest instead of a welfare check. And for the first time in her life, she realized she wasn't the main character. She ran for the door and screeched her tires as she peeled out of the driveway, leaving us standing in the silence of our victory. But as the adrenaline faded, a terrifying realization hit both of us at the exact same time. Miley wasn't going home to cry to our mother. She was cornered and furious and wanted to hurt me in the worst way possible. And Dominic grabbed his keys, shouting that she was still on the emergency pickup list for Jeffrey's daycare, and we sprinted to the truck knowing she was already halfway to the school to kidnap my son. My sister thought she was getting $5,000 for a vacation, but instead she got 3 years of probation and a criminal record, because when she peeled out of my driveway, she wasn't running away to hide. She was going to the one place she thought she could still hurt me. We froze for a split second before the horror set in, realizing that a narcissist with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing on earth. So we scrambled into the truck, and Dominic floored it out of the driveway, tires smoking as we sped toward the preschool. I tried calling Mrs. Gable, the director, but it went straight to voicemail, probably because it was 5:15 and pickup time is pure chaos. So I just gripped the dashboard and prayed we weren't too late while Dominic blew through a stop sign at the end of our street. We lived 12 minutes away, but Dominic made it in 6, drifting into the parking lot only to confirm my worst nightmare. Seeing the silver sedan parked diagonally across 2 handicap spots with the engine still running and the driver's door wide open. I didn't even wait for the truck to stop moving before I unbuckled and jumped out, sprinting toward the glass double doors while I heard the muffled sound of screaming coming from inside the lobby. It was absolute pandemonium inside. Miley was standing by the reception desk fighting for my son, trying to physically push past Mrs. Gable, who looked like a librarian but was built like a linebacker and was blocking the hallway with her body. Miley was screaming that he was her nephew and she had rights, grabbing at his backpack in the cubby. But when I slammed through the doors and screamed her name, she spun around with wild eyes, makeup smeared and hair a mess like a cornered animal. She pointed a shaking finger at me, yelling that I ruined everything and she just wanted to take him for ice cream. But Dominic walked in behind me and stood directly in front of the exit, blocking her only escape route and telling her simply, "You are done, Miley." That was the moment she broke, collapsing onto the linoleum floor and sobbing. Not the fake manipulative tears from the phone call, but the ugly, terrified sobbing of someone who knows their life is over. The police arrived 3 minutes later. Not Officer Dudley, but 2 officers responding to Mrs. Gable's frantic 911 call regarding an attempted kidnapping. And since I had the restraining order paperwork in my purse, they didn't need to ask many questions. They handcuffed her right there in front of the cubbies, and as they walked her out, she looked at me whimpering. "Kenzie, please tell them it's a misunderstanding. I'm your sister, who is going to take care of Mom." But I felt nothing but relief as I told her she should have thought about that before she tried to steal my child. My mother Shirley called me 2 hours later, not to ask if Jeffrey was safe, but to scream at me for getting her baby arrested, threatening to sell her house to pay for Miley's legal defense and sue me for entrapment. I didn't argue or try to explain the extortion. I just said 7 words I should have said 10 years ago. "If you contact me again, you are next." And then I hung up and changed my number for the last time. The legal process took 6 months, but Mr. Newman had a field day, using the audio confession and the daycare footage to secure a plea deal where Miley pleaded guilty to felony extortion and attempted custodial interference. She got 3 years of supervised probation and a permanent criminal record that will flag on every background check for the rest of her life, meaning her days of easy jobs are over, and she is legally barred from coming within 1,000 feet of my home or Jeffrey's school. As for the $5,000 she wanted for Tulum, Dominic and I took that exact amount from our savings and opened a compounding interest college fund for Jeffrey. Because karma isn't just a concept, sometimes it's a savings account paid for by the audacity of a toxic sister. Most people think the story ends when the judge bangs the gavel, but when your mother is the financial backbone for a criminal, the fallout lasts way longer than the trial. We thought we were finally free after the sentencing, enjoying the peace and quiet of a life without drama, until 3 days before Christmas when a U-Haul truck pulled up to our curb unannounced. I watched from the living room window as my mother Shirley climbed out of the passenger seat, looking older and more haggard than I had ever seen her, dragging 2 massive suitcases up my driveway while the U-Haul driver just idled in the street. I opened the front door, but I didn't unlock the storm door, keeping that pane of glass between us like a shield, and asked her what on earth she was doing. She didn't even say hello. She just looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "They took the house, Kenzie. The bank took everything. I have nowhere else to go." It turned out her threat to fund Miley's legal defense wasn't just talk. She had liquidated her retirement and took out a second mortgage to pay for the high-end lawyer who ultimately lost the case, and now she was destitute. She expected me to open the door, expected that family obligation would override the fact that she had sided with the woman who tried to kidnap my son. But I just stared at her and felt that same cold detachment I felt at the daycare. I told her that my home was a safe space for Jeffrey, and letting her in meant letting Miley's toxicity back into our lives by proxy, because I knew Miley would be calling her every 5 minutes demanding money she didn't have. Shirley started screaming, banging on the glass, yelling that I was ungrateful and cruel, that she was an old woman sleeping on the street because she tried to help her daughter. But then Dominic walked up behind me and pointed to the street. He asked, "Who is driving the U-Haul, Shirley?" And for the first time, my mother looked terrified instead of angry. We looked past her to the truck, and through the windshield, we could see the driver pulling down the sun visor to hide her face. But we knew that silver hair and that vape cloud anywhere. It was Miley. She had driven our mother here, meaning she was currently parked less than 50 feet from my front door, which was a direct and flagrant violation of the 1,000-foot restraining order she had agreed to as part of her plea deal. Dominic didn't even say a word. He just held up his phone so Miley could see he was dialing 911. And I watched my sister panic in real time. She didn't wait for Mom. She didn't help her with the bags. She just slammed the truck into drive and peeled out, leaving our mother standing on my porch with her suitcases, abandoned by the golden child she had destroyed her life to protect. When the police arrived, they didn't just remove my mother from the property. They took the security footage of Miley driving the truck. Because she was on probation, that violation wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a revocation of her suspended sentence. Miley is currently serving 6 months in county jail for violating the protective order. And my mother is living in a state-assisted senior facility 2 counties over because I refused to take her in. Sometimes I feel a twinge of sadness when I look at old family photos, remembering a time before the drugs and the extortion and the betrayal. But then I look at my son playing safely in the living room, and I remember that I didn't destroy my family. I survived it.